The small town of Maplewood was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's faces and their secrets. But lately, whispers had taken over the quiet streets. A child had seen something terrible, something that had silenced her voice. 8-year-old Lily Carter had once been full of laughter. She used to chase butterflies outside her mother's flower shop, her golden curls bouncing in the sunlight. But after that night, the one no one dared to talk about openly, she hadn't spoken a single word. Her mother, Sarah, sat beside her now in the sterile office of the Maplewood Police Department, her fingers trembling as she tucked a strand of hair behind Lily's ear. "It's all right, sweetheart," she whispered, though her voice cracked with exhaustion. "They just want to help." Lily's eyes stayed fixed on the floor. She clutched a small stuffed bunny so tightly that it seemed stretched. Across the table, Officer Daniel Reed glanced down at the report in his hand. He had seen countless cases in his 12 years as a K-9 handler, missing persons, drug busts, break-ins, but never something like this. A child witness, too scared to speak. The only clue was a broken bracelet found near the old train yard, where a series of robberies had ended in violence. The suspect, Mark Dalton, was in custody, but without Lily's statement, the case was crumbling. The door creaked open, and a low sound echoed down the hallway, the steady, confident trot of Ranger, Daniel's German Shepherd partner. The dog's nails clicked against the tile floor, his amber eyes alert yet calm. "Maybe the dog will help," Daniel murmured to the therapist who stood by the window. "Sometimes they respond better to animals." The therapist, Dr. Ellen Morris, nodded skeptically. "She hasn't reacted to anyone. But maybe, just maybe?" When Ranger entered the room, Lily's shoulders tensed. Her small fingers froze mid-motion, gripping the bunny tighter. The dog paused, head tilting slightly as if sensing her fear. His tail didn't wag. Instead, it hovered in a neutral position, cautious but attentive. Sarah frowned. "Officer, are you sure this is a good idea?" She's scared of everything now. Daniel knelt beside his dog. "Ranger won't hurt her," he said gently. "He's trained to protect. Let's just see how she reacts." Ranger stepped forward slowly, his movements deliberate, almost respectful. His gaze never left Lily's face. Then, without a sound, he sat down right in front of her, close enough to touch, but far enough to give her space. For a long, breathless moment, the room was silent. Everyone watched. Lily didn't move. Her wide eyes flicked up, needing Ranger's. Something unreadable passed between them, something deep and instinctive. Ranger tilted his head, ears twitching. He let out a soft whine, the kind he used when comforting victims during search and rescue missions. And then, to everyone's astonishment, Lily's lower lip trembled. Her eyes filled with tears. One slid down her cheek, landing on the plush bunny in her lap. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Still, the effort alone made her mother gasp softly. "Lily?" Sarah whispered, her heart pounding. Lily blinked rapidly, her small body trembling. Then she whispered something inaudible, barely a breath. Daniel leaned forward, trying to catch the words. But before he could ask her to repeat, Ranger barked, once sharp but not aggressive. It was as if he'd recognized something. Lily flinched, covering her ears. The dog immediately stopped, whining softly, lowering his head toward her lap. He nudged her hand with his nose gently. To everyone's amazement, Lily didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers touched his fur. Slowly, hesitantly, the room seemed to exhale. Dr. Morris's eyes widened. "That's the first time she's reached for anything but that stuffed toy," she whispered. Sarah covered her mouth, tears spilling. "Oh my God!" Daniel's voice was low, steady. "Good boy, Ranger." The dog stayed still, as Lily's small hands sank deeper into his fur. The softness seemed to comfort her. Her breathing steadied. Her eyes softened. But just as the moment began to calm, something strange happened, something that made Daniel's heart skip. Ranger's tail went rigid. His ears shot forward, muscles tensing as he sniffed the air around Lily. Then he stepped closer and began circling her slowly, nose to the ground. "Ranger?" Daniel said, puzzled. The dog wasn't showing aggression. This was the behavior he used when identifying scents connected to a case. Lily froze, watching him. Her eyes flicked from the badge on his harness to the faint scar above his right paw. She whispered, this time audibly, "Dog." Sarah gasped. She spoke. Dr. Morris's eyes filled with tears. "Lily, sweetheart, what did you say?" Lily's gaze didn't move from Ranger. Her voice quivered as she whispered again, "Dog." From the night, the words hit the room like a thunderclap. Daniel's breath caught. What did she say? "She said he's the dog from that night," Sarah repeated in disbelief. Ranger sat down again, staring at the girl, chest rising and falling. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. Ranger had been on patrol near the train yard that night. He'd returned from that route barking furiously, having detected something, but no one had found anything unusual. Now, weeks later, the missing piece sat before him, an 8-year-old child who recognized his dog. Daniel crouched beside Lily. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "did Ranger help you that night?" Lily's eyes welled again. Her lips moved silently, and then she nodded. Sarah's hands flew to her face as sobs broke free. Dr. Morris whispered, "She remembers?" Daniel's voice was quiet but heavy with emotion. "And he remembers her." For the first time since that dreadful night, Lily's voice grew steady. She reached out and placed her small hand on Ranger's head. "He barked," she whispered. "He made him go away." Daniel felt his throat tighten. That one sentence, fragile and incomplete, told him everything he needed to know. The dog hadn't just been on patrol. He had found Lily that night. He had protected her from the very man they were trying to convict. And now, standing here, he had somehow helped her find her voice again. Ranger let out a soft huff and rested his head in her lap. Lily's trembling stopped completely. She smiled faintly, the first hint of light Daniel had seen in her since she'd walked in. Sarah knelt beside her daughter, tears spilling freely. "Thank you," she whispered, looking at Daniel and Ranger. "Thank you both." Daniel nodded, still stunned. He knew they had just uncovered the first thread of truth, but something about it felt bigger, deeper, as though this small moment would unravel the entire case. Outside, the setting sun poured golden light through the blinds, bathing Lily and Ranger in a warm glow. Dr. Morris turned to Daniel quietly. "Whatever happened that night," she said, "your dog remembers it. And now she does too." Daniel looked at Ranger, his loyal partner, his silent witness, and felt the unspoken weight of what was coming. For the first time, he realized that this wasn't just a case. It was the beginning of a story that would change all their lives. For the first time in weeks, there was hope inside the Maplewood Police Department. Lily Carter had spoken. Just 2 words, "Dog," from the night. But those words carried more weight than anyone could measure. After that emotional encounter, Officer Daniel Reed couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing, something vital that neither the reports nor the forensics could explain. He replayed Lily's trembling voice in his head on the drive home, his mind looping through every patrol route, every bark Ranger had made that night near the train yard. That was the problem with being a K-9 officer. Sometimes your dog noticed things your human instincts ignored. Ranger sat quietly in the back seat now, head resting on his paws, the faint glint of his badge tag swaying with each bump in the road. The dog seemed unsettled, ears twitching every few seconds, as if replaying a memory only he could smell. Daniel reached back, scratching his partner's ear. "You knew her," he murmured. "Didn't you, boy?" Ranger blinked once, letting out a low, soft whine. It was as close to a yes as Daniel would ever get. The next morning, Daniel met with Dr. Ellen Morris, the child psychologist, at her office. The morning sun poured through the window blinds, cutting gold lines across her desk. She was flipping through Lily's evaluation notes when Daniel arrived. "She barely ate anything last night," Ellen said, her tone weary. "She's still afraid, but there's progress." "She keeps asking for the dog," Daniel smiled faintly. "That's Ranger for you? He wins hearts faster than I do." Ellen chuckled softly, but her eyes were thoughtful. "Daniel, whatever happened between them, that connection isn't ordinary. It's instinctual. She trusts him, maybe more than she trusts people right now." Daniel nodded. "I've seen it before. Trauma victims sometimes open up through canine interaction. But this is different." She recognized him. Ellen's brows knitted. "You mean from that night?" He nodded. "We patrolled that area. Ranger was acting strange when we came back. He barked nonstop, circled the patrol car like he wanted to go back. I thought it was an animal or a false alarm." Ellen leaned forward. "And now you think Lily was there, hiding?" Daniel hesitated, then sighed. "It's possible. If Ranger found her, it means he sensed danger, maybe scared the attacker off before we arrived." The psychologist's expression softened. "Then that dog saved her life." Daniel looked down at his calloused hands. "Maybe he did. But we need proof. The department won't reopen the evidence unless we find something new." Ellen glanced at her calendar. "She has another session this afternoon. Bring Ranger. Let's see what happens when they're together again." That afternoon, the therapy room was quiet, filled with soft pastel colors and the scent of vanilla candles. Lily sat on the rug, her stuffed bunny by her side. Her eyes flicked toward the door the second she heard Ranger's nails click against the tile. When he entered, her entire posture changed. Her shoulders lifted, her eyes brightened just slightly. It wasn't a smile yet, but it was close. "Hi, Lily," Daniel said gently. "Remember Ranger?" Lily nodded, fingers tightening around the bunny. He barked." Daniel crouched down. "Yes, he barked." "You remember when?" She hesitated. "Dark night. Train sound. He barked. Loud." Dr. Ellen glanced at Daniel, a silent cue to stay calm. Ranger moved closer, lowering himself until his nose touched the floor near Lily's shoes. He sniffed her jeans, then the small charm bracelet on her wrist, the matching one to the one found buried at the train yard. Suddenly, his body stiffened. His ears perked up, tail low. He turned his head toward Daniel, letting out a deep, resonant bark. Lily flinched, but instead of fear, recognition flickered in her eyes. "That bark," she whispered. "He barked like that." The man ran. Daniel froze. "What man, Lily?" Her little hands trembled. "He had, shiny thing. Light knife." He was shouting. Sarah, sitting in the corner, covered her mouth in horror. "Oh, God." Ellen moved closer, voice steady. "You're safe now, Lily. No one can hurt you. The man is gone." But Lily shook her head. "No, he's not gone. He was angry. Said he'd come back." The room fell silent. Ranger growled softly, a low warning sound. His gaze fixed on the window, as if protecting her from something unseen. Daniel's chest tightened. Dogs didn't react randomly. They felt fear, tension, adrenaline. And right now, Ranger was reading it all in the room. "Hey, buddy," Daniel said softly, stroking Ranger's fur. It's okay. She's safe now. But Ranger's eyes stayed locked on Lily, as if he knew something Daniel didn't. Later that evening, Daniel sat in his office, reviewing the security footage from the night of the crime. The grainy timestamp read 11:43 p.m. The train lights flickered in the distance, and faint movement appeared near the yard fence. He hit pause. There, a shadow. A man running. And in the corner, barely visible, two glowing reflections. Eyes, canine, catching the light for a split second. Daniel leaned closer, whispering, "Ranger." The dog had been there. He replayed the footage again and again, each time catching the same moment, Ranger's shape sprinting toward the movement before disappearing behind the train cars. Moments later, a figure fled in the opposite direction. Ranger had indeed chased someone away that night. Daniel rubbed his temples, adrenaline coursing. "You saved her," he murmured. "You really did." But then he noticed something else. In the corner of the screen, a flicker of smaller movement crouched near the rail tracks. A child-sized silhouette, Lily. She had been there all along, hiding in the shadows, clutching her stuffed bunny. The truth hit Daniel like a wave. Ranger had found her, protected her, and then led the suspect away before backup arrived. But the trauma of that night, the screaming, the flashing lights, the sirens, must have sealed her silence. Now she was remembering, piece by piece. The next morning, Daniel brought Ranger to the precinct for a review. His superior, Captain Lewis, listened with furrowed brows. "You're saying the dog already located the girl that night, and we missed it?" The captain asked, skeptical. Daniel nodded. "The evidence fits. The bracelet, her memory, the bark patterns, the video. She recognized Ranger instantly. He protected her before we even realized she was there." Captain Lewis sighed, rubbing his chin. "That's one hell of a claim, Reed. But if this holds, it could reopen the case and nail Dalton for good." Daniel nodded. "We just need Lily to confirm it in court. But she's still fragile. We have to move carefully. Then move fast," the captain said. "That suspect's hearing is in 3 days." That night, Daniel returned to the Carter home. The living room was warm, filled with the scent of lavender candles. Lily sat cross-legged on the rug, sketching something with colored pencils. When Daniel entered, she looked up shyly. "Hi, Lily," he said softly. "What are you drawing?" She held up the paper. It was a picture of a big dog standing in front of a crying girl under a dark sky. "That's you and Ranger, huh?" Daniel said, voice tight with emotion. Lily nodded. "He barked. And the man ran. He was brave." Ranger walked over and lay beside her. She giggled, a faint, beautiful sound Daniel hadn't heard before. For a moment, the world felt right again. But deep down, Daniel knew the real test was coming. Lily had found fragments of courage, yet the full truth still waited inside her. And when it came out, the courtroom would never be the same. The courthouse in downtown Maplewood had never been this full. Reporters, townspeople, and officers filled every seat, whispering anxiously. The case of State versus Mark Dalton had drawn attention for weeks, but today was different. Today, the little girl who hadn't spoken since that night was expected to take the stand. Judge Helen Maris adjusted her glasses, glancing toward the door. "Is the witness ready?" she asked, her voice calm but heavy with expectation. Prosecutor Tom Avery rose from his chair. "Your Honor, the witness is a minor. We'll proceed with sensitivity." The defense attorney, Richard Lowell, smirked faintly. "If she even speaks," he muttered under his breath. At the back of the courtroom, Officer Daniel Reed stood beside Ranger, his K-9 partner sitting obediently at his heel. The dog's eyes scanned the room, alert but composed. Daniel's heart pounded in rhythm with the clicking of the judge's pen. He knew this day could change everything, not just the case, but Lily's life. The doors opened. Lily Carter stepped inside, her small frame almost swallowed by the oversized courtroom. She wore a pale blue dress and clutched her stuffed bunny tight. Her mother, Sarah, walked beside her, whispering softly, "You can do this, sweetheart. You're so brave." Every eye followed her as she took her seat on the witness stand. The microphone looked enormous next to her face. Judge Helen's tone softened. "Good morning, Lily." Lily's fingers twisted the hem of her dress. "Morning," she whispered, barely audible. "That's all right," the judge said gently. "You can speak quietly. We'll all listen carefully." Tom Avery smiled reassuringly. "Lily, you remember me, right? I'm the man who brought you hot chocolate when you came to the station." She nodded. He crouched a little, keeping his tone calm. "We just need you to tell the truth today. Do you remember what happened the night near the train yard?" Silence. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Lily's lips trembled. Her hands tightened around the bunny until its stitched ear bent backward. Daniel shifted uneasily, watching from across the room. Ranger's ears twitched, as though sensing her distress. Tom Avery tried again. "You can take your time. You're safe here, Lily. Do you see the man who scared you that night?" Her eyes flickered to the defense table. Mark Dalton, tall and broad-shouldered, sat there in his gray suit. His gaze was cold and unblinking. When Lily's eyes met his, her breath hitched. The room tensed. Sarah half rose from her seat, whispering, "It's okay, baby." But Lily didn't move. She froze, her body stiff. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. The same darkness from that night seemed to close in around her. The flash of a blade, the sound of shouting, the train's distant horn. Her throat felt like it was closing. And then a sound broke through the haze. A soft, familiar panting. Ranger. He was lying calmly beside Daniel, eyes locked on her. The steady rhythm of his breathing reached her through the chaos of her thoughts. She blinked. Her small voice cracked as she whispered, "Dog." The judge leaned forward. "Excuse me, sweetheart." Lily looked directly at Ranger. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but her expression was different now. Not fear, but recognition. She slowly raised a trembling finger, pointing at him. Two words slipped out of her mouth, quiet but clear enough to echo through the entire courtroom. "He knows." Gasps filled the room. The judge froze mid-motion. Tom Avery blinked, stunned. "What did you say, Lily?" Lily's voice grew steadier, her tone more certain this time. "He knows." The dog, he was there. Daniel's breath caught. Ranger, as if understanding her words, rose to his feet. He didn't bark, just stood tall and alert, gaze fixed on Lily. Mark Dalton shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Judge Helen's eyes darted between the girl, the officer, and the dog. "Officer Reed, please step forward with the K-9. Daniel hesitated, then led Ranger toward the stand. The dog's presence seemed to calm Lily. Her shoulders relaxed. "Lily," the judge said gently, "when you say he knows, what do you mean?" Lily swallowed hard. "That night, I heard yelling. I saw the man. And then the dog came. He barked loud. The man ran. The dog, he looked at me. He found me." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Tom Avery whispered, "Your Honor, this confirms the girl was at the scene." But the defense attorney sprang up. "Objection! This is a child's imagination, influenced by seeing the dog in the courtroom. There's no factual basis." "Sit down, Mr. Lowell," Judge Helen interrupted sharply. Her voice, though calm, carried authority. "We'll determine the weight of her testimony after questioning." She turned back to Lily. "Sweetheart, you're doing so well. Can you tell me if the man you saw that night is here today?" Lily's hand trembled. Her gaze swept across the room, then stopped at the defense table. Mark Dalton's eyes narrowed. Slowly, Lily lifted her hand and pointed, not at the dog this time, but directly at him. The silence was electric. Her voice, barely above a whisper, cut through the air. He hurt people. Sarah broke into quiet sobs. Tom Avery exhaled shakily. Your Honor, I request an immediate recess to review this statement. Judge Helen nodded solemnly. Granted. She turned to Lily. You've been very brave. Thank you. As the judge banged her gavel, the courtroom erupted into murmurs. In the hallway outside, chaos reigned. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. Sarah held Lily tightly, shielding her from the noise. Daniel knelt beside them, keeping Ranger close. The dog's tail brushed against Lily's knee, a silent comfort. Lily, Daniel said softly, you did something incredible in there. She looked at him with wide eyes. He remembered me, didn't he? Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, he did. Ranger nudged her hand with his nose. Dr. Ellen, who had come to support Lily, stepped forward. Those two words, he knows, may open everything, she said to Daniel quietly. She's connecting memory and emotion. That's powerful. Daniel nodded, but his mind was already racing ahead. If Lily was right, if Ranger's reaction at the crime scene matched her memory, there might be more evidence hidden out there. Something the dog could find again. He looked down at Ranger. You ready for another search, buddy? Ranger gave a low, steady bark, the kind that meant always. Meanwhile, in the judge's chambers, Helen Morris sat staring at the case file. She had presided over hundreds of trials in her career, but this felt different. A child's trauma, a loyal dog, a moment of truth that defied logic. 2 words, she murmured. He knows. They echoed in her head like a haunting melody. Could an animal truly hold the key to a human crime? That evening, as the courthouse lights dimmed, Daniel returned to the train yard with Ranger. The autumn air was sharp and cold. The place was eerily silent, except for the rustle of dry leaves. Find, Daniel whispered, giving the command. Ranger lowered his nose to the ground, circling slowly. After a few minutes, he barked, then began digging near the old fence line. Daniel's flashlight caught the glint of something metallic. He crouched, brushing away dirt, and froze. It was a knife. Rusted at the edges, but still stained with something darker. Good boy, Daniel whispered, heart pounding. The weapon was wrapped carefully and sealed for evidence. The case had just taken a turn no one saw coming. Back home, Lily sat by her window, gazing up at the moonlight. She whispered softly to her stuffed bunny. He remembered. From outside, she could hear a faint bark echo through the night, steady, loyal, protective. And for the first time since that terrible night, she smiled. The truth was beginning to surface, and the world was finally listening. The sun had barely risen when Officer Daniel Reed stood in the evidence lab, staring at the metal tray where the knife lay. Under the bright fluorescence, the blade looked menacing, dulled by rust, but unmistakably dangerous. The forensic team moved around him, whispering in low voices. This knife could change everything, said Dr. Maria Henson, the lead forensic examiner. It's the same brand and size as the one used in the warehouse assault. We'll run DNA and prints, but if this links to Dalton, the case is over. Daniel crossed his arms, still uneasy. Ranger found it in less than 10 minutes. That can't be coincidence. Maria nodded thoughtfully. That dog may have just done more detective work than half the department. Daniel gave a faint smile. Yeah, but it's not over yet. He turned, watching through the glass window that separated the lab from the hallway. Beyond it, a small figure was walking with her mother. Lily and Sarah had come in for another interview. Lily still clutched her bunny, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar space. Daniel felt something twist inside him, a mix of protectiveness and awe. That little girl had faced her worst fear in a courtroom and spoken 2 words that could take down a monster. And yet, deep down, he couldn't shake one thing. Why did Ranger react so strongly at that specific spot? If Lily's memory was right, something more had happened that night, something no one had pieced together yet. Hours later, Daniel sat with Detective Lara Briggs in the precinct's briefing room. Case files were spread across the table, photos, reports, and maps of the train yard. Lavra pointed to a photo taken years ago. Dalton used to work here before he was fired. Maintenance supervisor. He had access to restricted areas. Daniel frowned. So he knew every corner of the yard. He could have planned the attack. Exactly, Lara said. And there's more. We found out he's been living under a second address outside town. Warehouse property registered under a fake name, Town Reedman. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Reedman? That's barely even an alias. Lavra smirked. Criminals aren't known for creativity. Then her tone grew serious. If we can prove he kept anything from that night, any evidence or trophies, it's over for him. Daniel leaned back, thinking. Then we searched the warehouse. Lavra hesitated. We need a warrant first. But the judge will want solid reasoning after today's court session. Can you get Lily's therapist to back the connection? Daniel nodded. Dr. Ellen's already reviewing Lily's statements. If we can show that her memory aligns with Ranger's find, Judge Morris will sign it. By afternoon, Daniel was standing once again before Judge Helen Morris. The courtroom was empty this time. No audience, no cameras, only quiet gravity. He explained everything. The knife, the match to the assault weapon, the K9's detection, and Lily's consistent testimony. Judge Morris listened carefully, her face unreadable. You're asking me to authorize a search based on a child's statement and a dog's intuition. Daniel met her gaze firmly. Respectfully, Your Honor, Ranger isn't guessing. He reacted because there was something there, and he found proof. That child was traumatized, yes, but she remembered something real. You saw her courage. Now we owe her truth. Helen studied him for a long moment, then sighed and signed the paper. You'd better be right, Officer Reed. Bring me something solid. Daniel nodded. I intend to. That night, a convoy of police vehicles rolled quietly toward the edge of town. The old warehouse sat alone beside the river, its broken windows glowing faintly under the moonlight. The building looked like a relic from another life, forgotten, abandoned, but watching. Daniel stepped out of his SUV, flashlight in hand. Ranger stood alert beside him, nose twitching in the cold air. All right, boy, Daniel whispered. Let's finish what we started. The officers moved in, sweeping the building systematically. Dust swirled through their beams of light. Rats scurried in the shadows. But Ranger was focused, moving between pillars, sniffing old boxes, until suddenly he froze. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Got something? Daniel crouched beside him. Ranger's gaze fixed on a section of the floor where a metal grate sat half-covered by crates. Daniel pulled them aside, coughed as dust filled the air, and lifted the grate. Beneath it was a narrow crawl space. He shined his light down and froze. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Each one showed different people, strangers, all appearing unaware they were being photographed. Some photos were old, others recent. And among them, Lily, a picture of her outside her school, another from the park. Daniel's stomach dropped. Oh God. Lavra appeared beside him. What the hell is this? Evidence, Daniel said grimly. And a timeline. There was also a small wooden box. Inside it lay several personal items. Jewelry, watches, a child's hairpin. tokens, trophies. This isn't just one assault, Lara whispered. He's been doing this for years. Daniel clenched his jaw. Not anymore. Ranger barked once, loud and sharp, as if agreeing. They collected everything, carefully sealed it, and returned to the vehicles. Daniel sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the warehouse. The realization hit him like a wave. Lily hadn't just pointed at a random man. She had pointed at a predator who'd been hiding in plain sight, and somehow Ranger had remembered the scent of his crimes. By morning, the evidence was delivered to the district attorney's office. The knife had already tested positive for Dalton's DNA, and now, with the new findings, the case was ironclad. The news spread fast. Local officer and K-9 team uncover hidden evidence in child assault case. Cameras flooded the station. Reporters tried to interview Daniel, but he refused. For him, this wasn't about glory. It was about justice and healing. Lily and Sarah watched the news from home. When the reporter mentioned Ranger's name, Lily smiled for the first time in days. "Mommy," she said softly, "Ranger's a hero." Sarah hugged her tight. "Yes, sweetheart, he is." Later that afternoon, Daniel visited them at their house. Ranger trotted beside him, tail wagging softly. When Lily opened the door and saw the dog, she gasped and ran forward. "Ranger!" The dog sat obediently, letting her wrap her small arms around his neck. Daniel smiled. "He's been asking about you." Lily giggled. "He can't talk." "Maybe not," Daniel said, crouching to her level, "but he says a lot without words." Lily's eyes sparkled. "Like he knows." Daniel nodded slowly, the memory of that moment still vivid. "Exactly like that." Then more softly, he added, "You helped us find the truth, Lily, because you were brave enough to speak." She looked up at him shyly. "Did I do good?" "You did amazing," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah watched them from the doorway, tears glimmering. "Thank you, Officer Reed. You gave my daughter her voice back." Daniel shook his head gently. "No, ma'am. She found it herself. We just listened." That evening, as the sun set over Maplewood, Daniel stood outside the station with Ranger. The air was cool, filled with the scent of pine and distant rain. He looked down at his partner. "You did good, buddy. Real good." Ranger barked once, tail thumping against Daniel's leg. Daniel smiled faintly. "Guess the judge won't believe what happens next either." Because tomorrow, Mark Dalton's trial would resume, and this time, the evidence would speak louder than words. But for now, for one quiet night, justice finally felt within reach. The courthouse was packed again. The scent of coffee, paper, and tension hung thick in the air. Reporters filled every seat, their cameras ready, their pens poised. It had been only 2 days since Officer Daniel Reed and his K-9 partner, Ranger, discovered the hidden cache in the old warehouse. The town of Maplewood hadn't stopped buzzing since. Everyone wanted to know what would happen now, if justice would finally catch up to Mark Dalton, or if somehow he would slip through the cracks again. Judge Helen Morris entered the courtroom with a grave expression. "Court is now in session," she announced, her gavel striking once. "This is the continuation of State versus Mark Dalton." The murmurs faded instantly. At the prosecution's table, District Attorney Tom Avery looked sharp and composed, but beneath his calm exterior, excitement simmered. The new evidence, a knife, the photographs, the stolen tokens, was airtight. This could be the day Dalton was finally cornered. At the defense table, Richard Lowell looked tense. He had spent the night trying to discredit the evidence, but failed miserably. Every piece tied back to his client. Every trail pointed to guilt. Mark Dalton himself sat unnervingly still, his eyes cold and unblinking. If he felt fear, he didn't show it. He watched every move Daniel made, every whisper between the prosecutor and the judge, with the gaze of a predator who refused to accept defeat. Lily and her mother, Sarah, sat quietly in the front row. The little girl's hands trembled slightly, but she looked braver than ever. She wore a tiny silver bracelet Ranger's handler had given her, a small charm in the shape of a paw print. Officer Daniel Reed stood beside the witness bench, Ranger sitting obediently at his side. The dog's calmness filled the tense room like an invisible shield. Tom Avery stood and began. Your Honor, the prosecution presents new evidence discovered through the assistance of Officer Reed and his canine partner, Ranger. Judge Morris nodded. Proceed. Tom turned toward the jury. 2 nights ago, during a follow-up search of an abandoned warehouse once owned by the defendant, Officer Reed's canine unit detected a hidden compartment. Inside, we found a knife later confirmed by forensic testing to bear the defendant's DNA. We also discovered a collection of photographs and personal items belonging to multiple victims. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The photographs include images of one of our witnesses, the minor, Lily Carter. This proves premeditation and pattern. The jury exchanged uneasy glances. Richard Lowell shot up. Objection. This evidence was obtained without due process. The search was conducted under a valid warrant, Tom interrupted. Signed by Judge Morris herself. The courtroom rippled with gasps. The judge raised her hand for silence. Objection overruled. Tom turned back to the witness stand. Officer Reed, please describe how you located the evidence. Daniel took a breath, his voice steady but measured. Ranger indicated a spot under the warehouse floor. When we lifted the grate, we found the knife and photographs. Forensics confirmed they were connected to Mr. Dalton. Tom nodded. Did Ranger previously encounter the defendant? Yes, Daniel replied. At the original crime scene, Ranger tracked the scent from the victim's location directly toward the yard exit. That same scent was found again during the search. Thank you, officer. Daniel stepped back slightly, but his gaze remained fixed on Dalton, who, to everyone's unease, was smiling faintly now. Tom continued, Your Honor, I also request to introduce one final piece of evidence recovered from the box. He lifted a sealed plastic bag containing an old photograph, faded, slightly torn, but still clear enough to make out 2 faces. The courtroom leaned forward. It was a picture of 2 young men in police academy uniforms, one of them unmistakably Mark Dalton, smiling confidently. And beside him, Daniel Reed. The room erupted into whispers. Judge Morris blinked in shock. Mr. Avery, explain. Tom's voice wavered for a moment before steadying. This photograph was discovered among the defendant's personal effects. It appears Officer Reed and Mr. Dalton knew each other prior to Dalton's dismissal from the academy 15 years ago. All eyes turned to Daniel. He stood frozen, his pulse thundering in his ears. The image blurred as old memories clawed their way back to the surface. A dusty training field, a line of cadets, and a young man beside him laughing as they shared lunch breaks. Mark Dalton. Back then, Dalton wasn't the monster he was now. Or maybe he had been, and Daniel just never saw it. Lowell seized the moment. Your Honor, the defense moves to dismiss Officer Reed's testimony on grounds of conflict of interest. Clearly, this witness had a prior relationship with my client. The room broke into chaos. Voices rose. Reporters scribbled furiously. Judge Morris slammed her gavel. Order. I will have order in this courtroom. She turned to Daniel, her eyes sharp but not unkind. Officer Reed, did you know the defendant before this case? Daniel exhaled slowly. Yes, Your Honor. We trained together in the police academy. But I haven't seen or spoken to him in over a decade. He was dismissed for misconduct, falsifying reports, and tampering with evidence. Tom Avery interjected quickly. "Your Honor, the prosecution had no prior knowledge of this photograph. However, Officer Reed's record and conduct during this investigation remain impeccable. His actions have been transparent and verifiable." Lowell sneered. "Transparent or convenient?" The judge gave him a withering look. "Enough, Mr. Lowell. The court will determine relevance after review. For now, the evidence stands." Daniel sat down, his jaw tight. He felt the sting of the moment, the seed of doubt planted before the jury. Dalton's smirk had widened into a full smile. During recess, Daniel stood in the hallway, staring at the photo. His reflection in the glass looked worn, haunted. "Hey," a voice said softly. It was Laura Briggs. She had been watching the trial from the back. "You okay?" Daniel shook his head. "He's trying to twist this. He wants me to look like I'm framing him." Lavra folded her arms. "Don't let him. You've got the truth, the evidence, the forensics, the witnesses. That's all that matters." Daniel sighed. "It's never that simple with guys like him. He knows how to manipulate. He used to charm instructors, bend rules, until he got caught." She gave him a look. "Then remind everyone why you're on the right side now." Back inside, the trial resumed. Tom Avery played a security recording, a grainy video showing Dalton entering the warehouse late at night, the same week Lily was attacked. The jury watched silently. Dalton's lawyer tried to object, but the judge's patience had worn thin. Overruled. When the lights came back on, Dalton's smirk was gone. For the first time, he looked nervous. Tom's voice rose with conviction. "The defendant has been hunting victims for years. The only reason he was caught is because a brave child spoke the truth, and a loyal police dog remembered what humans forgot." The jury's faces were grave, their eyes full of empathy. Judge Morris nodded. "The court will reconvene tomorrow for closing arguments. Mr. Dalton will remain in custody." The gavel struck. As the crowd began to disperse, Dalton leaned toward Daniel, his voice low but venomous. "You think you're better than me, Reed? You only caught me because of that dog. You forget, I trained with you. I know you." Daniel didn't flinch. "Yeah, and that's exactly why I know you'll never win." Dalton's smile twisted. "We'll see. You still have secrets too." The bailiffs pulled him away before Daniel could respond. But those words echoed long after Dalton was gone. That night, Daniel stood outside the courthouse, the city quiet under the pale moon. Ranger sat beside him, head resting against his leg. "You did good today, boy," Daniel murmured, rubbing his fur. "Tomorrow we finish this." Ranger lifted his head, eyes gleaming, as if he understood. But in Daniel's chest, unease stirred. Dalton's last words replayed again and again. "You still have secrets too." He didn't know what Dalton meant yet, but he was about to find out. This part dives deep into revelations and hidden truths. Mark Dalton's sinister past, his twisted motive for revenge, and the shocking connection between him and Officer Daniel Reed that resurfaces in a way no one expected. It's dark, emotional, and packed with tension as the case begins to unravel in the most unexpected way. Part 6, The Past That Wouldn't Stay Buried, approximately equals 1,200 words. The night before the final hearing, the Maplewood police station felt unusually still. Most officers had gone home, leaving only a handful behind, the hum of fluorescent lights, the faint ticking of the wall clock, and the occasional bark from the K9 kennels filled the silence. Officer Daniel Reed sat alone at his desk, staring at the photo he couldn't forget, the one showing him and Mark Dalton standing side by side in academy uniforms. both smiling as if the world was still simple back then. But it wasn't, not even then. The file on his desk was open. Pages spread like scattered memories. Mark Dalton, dismissed for misconduct, falsified evidence, aggression during training drills. Daniel remembered that day too vividly. Dalton had framed another cadet for cheating, and when the truth came out, Daniel had testified against him. Dalton was expelled. Daniel graduated top of the class. And apparently, Dalton never forgave him. A low growl pulled Daniel from his thoughts. Ranger sat beside him, head tilted, eyes steady and alert. Daniel smiled faintly. "You can tell something's off, can't you, buddy?" Ranger gave a short, quiet bark. Daniel reached down, scratching behind his ears. "You always could." He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "You know, he said I had secrets too." But what could he mean by that? As if on cue, the phone on his desk buzzed. "Reed, Detective Briggs here," came the voice on the other end. "You might want to come down to the evidence room. We just got something new." Daniel's pulse quickened. "On Dalton?" "Yes, and you're not going to like it." The evidence room was cold, its air tinged with dust and the metallic scent of old files. Detective Lavra Briggs stood by a table, holding a manila envelope. "This arrived anonymously an hour ago," she said. "No return address, no fingerprints. It was slid under the station door." Daniel frowned. "What's inside?" Lavra opened the envelope and pulled out a single USB drive. "We ran it through for malware, clean. But the contents, you should see for yourself." She inserted it into the computer. The screen flickered to life, showing a folder titled Proof. Inside was one video file. Lavra clicked play. The grainy footage showed a dimly lit room, the same warehouse where the knife had been found. A figure stood in the frame, partially masked by shadows. But the voice that came next froze Daniel in place. "This is what happens when you destroy someone's life." It was Dalton. "He thought he was better than me. Took my future, took my badge, took everything. So I took something from him." Daniel leaned closer, tension tightening in his chest. Dalton stepped into the light, eyes wild. "You all think I hurt random people? But every name, every face, they were connected to him." To Reed, the video cut abruptly. Daniel stared at the blank screen, stunned. "That's insane." "He's lying." Lavra crossed her arms. "We checked some of the victims' backgrounds after the last search. 2 of them had relatives who once worked at your precinct. Another used to live in your neighborhood." Daniel's stomach dropped. "You think I?" "No," Lavra said quickly. "I don't, but Dalton does. He's building a story, one that paints you as the reason he became a monster." Daniel exhaled shakily. "He's not just after justice. He's after me." Lavra nodded. "And he's not done yet. That video was sent for a reason. He wants the court to see it." The next morning, the courtroom was a storm waiting to break. The air buzzed with whispers and flashing cameras. Judge Helen Maris called the session to order. "We will now proceed with final arguments." Tom Avery rose, ready to close the case once and for all. But before he could speak, Richard Lowell, Dalton's defense attorney, stood abruptly. "Your Honor, the defense wishes to submit new evidence." Tom frowned. "New evidence? At this stage?" Judge Morris sighed. "Proceed, Mr. Lowell, but make it brief." Lowell smirked. "I believe this evidence will cast doubt on the state's narrative and on one of its key officers." He inserted a USB drive into the courtroom's display monitor. Daniel's heart sank. The video began to play. Dalton's voice echoed through the silent courtroom. "He took my badge. He took my life. Every victim was a message to him." Gasps filled the room. Tom shot to his feet. Objection. This is unverified material, clearly self-serving, but Judge Morris raised a hand. Let it play. The footage ended abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence. The jurors looked unsettled. Lowell spread his hands dramatically. Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecution's star officer isn't just connected to my client. He created him. Objection. Tom barked again, his voice sharp. This is a manipulation tactic. Judge Morris nodded curtly. Objection sustained. The jury will disregard speculative statements. But the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted. Daniel could feel eyes turning toward him, some sympathetic, others questioning. He clenched his fists, jaw tight. Dalton, sitting calmly in his chair, glanced at him and smiled. During the recess, Daniel paced the courthouse hallway, his thoughts racing. Lavra caught up with him, pressing a folder into his hand. I ran a background check after the video. I found something you need to see. Inside the folder was a hospital record, dated 15 years ago. Patient, Mark Dalton. Diagnosis: head trauma sustained during a training accident. Incident report filed by Officer Daniel Reed. Daniel frowned. This was when we were cadets. He got injured during a drill. Lavra nodded. According to the report, his injury disqualified him from active duty even before he was expelled. He always blamed you for it. Daniel looked up, realization dawning. That's what this is all about. He's been blaming me for his life falling apart. The dismissal, the injury, everything. Every crime he committed was part of his revenge. Laura's voice lowered. You're not just his enemy, Daniel. You're his obsession. Back in the courtroom, Tom Avery took control of the moment. Your Honor, if the defense wishes to weaponize edited footage, the prosecution will present the full truth. He turned to the screen and played a different clip, police body cam footage from the warehouse raid. Dalton could be heard muttering to himself during his arrest. Reed will finally know what it's like to lose everything. Just like I did. Tom faced the jury. That's not justice speaking. That's vengeance. That's obsession. Officer Reed didn't create a monster. He exposed one. The tension broke like a wave. Jurors nodded slowly, their expressions hardening. Dalton's smug composure began to crack. His knuckles whitened against the table. Judge Morris's tone was firm. The jury will consider the verified evidence only. Closing arguments will continue tomorrow. She banged the gavel. The session adjourned. Outside the courthouse, Daniel stood under the fading evening light, exhaustion etched across his face. The chaos of reporters buzzed around, but he didn't hear them. He looked down at Ranger, who sat patiently beside him. You knew from the start, didn't you? Daniel murmured. You knew this wasn't just about the case. Ranger looked up, eyes steady, loyal, unwavering. Daniel sighed, crouching to pat him. He wants to destroy me, but he doesn't get to destroy her. Not Lily, not anyone else. The wind rustled through the courthouse flags as Daniel whispered, Tomorrow. This ends. Ranger's tail flicked once against the pavement, the silent promise of a guardian ready for one final fight. But deep inside, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that Dalton still had one last move to play. The courthouse was wrapped in an eerie tension that morning, the kind of silence that settles before a storm. Reporters swarmed outside the stone steps of Maplewood District Court, their cameras flashing as if they could capture the pulse of the city itself. Inside, every seat was filled, the air heavy with anticipation. Today was the final hearing, the day justice would decide who truly wore the mask of guilt. Mark Dalton, the man accused of manipulating lives through vengeance, or the system he claimed had betrayed him. Officer Daniel Reed adjusted his tie, though it felt like the air itself was tightening around his throat. He glanced at Ranger, sitting quietly beside his handler in the corner. The German shepherd's calm gaze met his, steady, grounding. It reminded Daniel that no matter how twisted things became, truth always had a scent. He whispered under his breath, "Stay sharp, buddy." Ranger's ears perked slightly, as if to acknowledge the unspoken tension hanging in the air. When Judge Helen Morris entered, the gavel struck sharply. This court is now in session for the final arguments in the case of State versus Mark Dalton, she declared. Mr. Avery, you may proceed. Tom Avery, the prosecutor, stood, his expression composed yet resolute. Your Honor, members of the jury, we've seen the evidence, we've heard the threats, and we've watched a man twist tragedy into justification for cruelty. But today, we're not here to judge pain. We're here to judge choices. Mark Dalton chose revenge. He turned to face Dalton, whose smirk never wavered. This man didn't just commit crimes. He crafted them to send messages, to manipulate narratives, to destroy the reputation of a man who once stood beside him as a brother in uniform. Daniel felt the weight of every word. Tom continued, he claims Officer Reed stole his future. But what about the families of those he targeted? The victims who never got to choose? That's not justice. That's ego. He walked to the jury box. And now, after everything, he dares to turn this courtroom into his final stage. But let's not forget, even when the mask falls, a monster remains a monster. He sat down. The room was still. Then, with deliberate calm, Richard Lowell, Dalton's defense attorney, rose. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his tone slick as oil. You've heard an eloquent speech about monsters and choices. But ask yourselves, who created this so-called monster? He gestured toward Daniel. A man who testified against his friend, who ensured his expulsion, who turned a blind eye to his suffering. Officer Reed built a career on perfection, but perfection often hides imperfection beneath. Daniel's jaw tightened. Lowell continued, my client suffered a head injury during training under Officer Reed's supervision. His dreams ended there. He wasn't just expelled. He was erased. And for years, while Reed rose through the ranks, Dalton lived with the consequences of another man's ambition. He paused, lowering his voice. So tell me, when the system destroys you, and no one listens, what's left but rage? Whispers rippled through the audience. Judge Morris cleared her throat. Mr. Lowell, confine your statements to facts. Lowell bowed slightly. Of course, Your Honor. He turned toward Dalton, who leaned back in his chair, smiling faintly. But the truth is simple. Pain demands acknowledgement. My client didn't seek revenge. He sought recognition. He sat. As the judge prepared to dismiss for deliberation, a sudden bark broke the tension. Every head turned toward Ranger. The German shepherd stood rigid, his nose lifted, muscles tense. A low growl rumbled in his throat. The handler tugged his leash gently. Ranger, easy. But the dog didn't relax. Instead, his gaze locked on Dalton. Judge Morris frowned. Is there a problem, officer? Daniel stood instantly. Your Honor, Rangers trained to detect explosives, narcotics, or weapons. If he's reacting, Dalton laughed, sharp and unsettling. Oh, come on. You think I'd bring something dangerous here? Ranger barked again, louder this time. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. The handler bent down, checking Ranger's reaction. He's alerting for metal, possibly something hidden. Dalton's expression shifted. For the first time, his mask cracked. Mr. Dalton, Judge Morris ordered, stand and place your hands on the table. The bailiffs moved closer. One reached for Dalton's jacket, and then chaos erupted. Dalton shoved the table forward, sending papers and a water glass flying. Don't touch me, he roared. His hand dove inside his suit, pulling something small and glinting. Not a gun, but a trigger device. Gasps filled the courtroom. "Everyone down!" Daniel shouted, rushing forward as the bailiffs tackled Dalton. Ranger lunged, knocking the man's arm away as the device clattered to the floor. It didn't explode. The room froze. Daniel kicked it aside carefully. "Disarm it now." One officer swept it up, his voice shaking. "It's a detonator, but signal's cut. It's not connected." Dalton laughed, wild-eyed. "Not connected yet." Daniel grabbed him by the collar. "What did you do?" Dalton's grin widened. "You think I came here alone?" For a moment, every sound in the courtroom faded, and a faint beep echoed through the vents. "Evacuate the building," Judge Morris shouted, slamming her gavel down. "Now." The next 10 minutes were chaos. Officers swept through hallways, clearing rooms, searching every vent and trash bin. Ranger led the charge, sniffing with precision, his tail stiff, ears alert. They found it, a small package hidden beneath the judge's bench, wired crudely but functional. A makeshift bomb, timer blinking red. Ranger froze beside it, whining softly. "Get the bomb squad here, now," Daniel ordered. 2 technicians rushed in, working swiftly. One cut the wire. The light flicked off. Silence. Then, applause erupted outside as people realized they were safe. But Daniel didn't celebrate. He stared at Dalton, who was being restrained, smirking even through bloodied lips. "You never change," Daniel said quietly. "Still trying to destroy lives just to feel important." Dalton leaned closer. "I already did. You'll see." Hours later, after the building was cleared and the courtroom reopened, Judge Morris reconvened the session. Dalton sat restrained, his eyes glinting with something between fury and madness. "Mr. Dalton," she said coldly, "you have crossed from manipulation into terrorism. This court will not tolerate such acts. You are hereby remanded to federal custody pending additional charges." Dalton smirked. "You think this ends with me?" Her gavel struck like thunder. "It ends here." When the proceedings finally adjourned, Daniel stepped outside into the cool evening air. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed, but he didn't answer any of them. He knelt beside Ranger, placing a hand on the dog's neck. "You saved everyone today, partner." Ranger wagged his tail once, steady and calm, as if it were just another day on duty. But Daniel's thoughts wouldn't quiet. Dalton's final words echoed in his head. "You think this ends with me?" That night, Daniel sat alone in his apartment, the city lights flickering through the blinds. He stared at his old academy photo again, him and Dalton side by side, young and proud, before everything went wrong. He whispered to the empty room, "It's over now." But deep down, he wasn't sure. Because somewhere, buried in the darkness of Dalton's mind, he sensed there was still one last secret, one that hadn't yet come to light. And tomorrow, when Lily took the stand to testify about what she saw, about the moment she pointed at Ranger and said those 2 haunting words, the truth would finally break free. The final day of the trial dawned with a strange stillness over Maplewood. The courthouse, once buzzing with chaos and fear, now stood quiet, almost reverent. Yet beneath the calm, tension pulsed like an unseen current. Everyone knew that today, the truth would finally emerge. Inside courtroom 3, the air was heavy with anticipation. The crowd had doubled since the bomb scare. Reporters sat poised, pens and cameras ready. The front row held faces from every local news outlet, all waiting for the moment that had gripped the nation. The testimony of the little girl who had pointed at the police dog and uttered 2 mysterious words. Lily Harper, just 6 years old, sat beside her guardian on the witness bench. Her feet didn't reach the floor, and her hands clutched a small stuffed rabbit. Despite her size, The room seemed to revolve around her. Across the courtroom, Mark Dalton sat in handcuffs, his smirk faint but present. His face was bruised from the scuffle the day before, but his eyes burned with the same dangerous light. And a few feet away, Officer Daniel Reed sat stiffly, his gaze fixed on Lily. He hadn't slept since the explosion attempt. The image of Dalton's sneer, the echo of his warning, "You think this ends with me?" haunted him. Beside Daniel, Ranger lay alert, head resting between his paws, amber eyes watching the room with quiet awareness. Judge Helen Morris entered, her expression unreadable. "This court will now hear testimony from Miss Lily Harper. Mr. Avery, please proceed." Prosecutor Tom Avery stood and smiled reassuringly. "Good morning, Lily." She looked up timidly. "Good morning. You're very brave for being here today. Can you tell us, do you remember the night the police found you?" She nodded. "Yes, I remember the noise. And the dog." Everyone leaned forward. Tom softened his tone. "You mean Ranger?" "Yes," Lily said, pointing toward the German Shepherd. Ranger lifted his head, tail wagging gently. "What happened when you saw Ranger?" Tom asked. Lily hesitated, glancing toward her guardian. Then she looked back at Ranger. "He came up to me. I was scared, but he didn't bark. He just looked at me." Tom nodded. "And then what did you say?" Lily took a deep breath. "I said, he remembers." A ripple of whispers broke through the courtroom. Judge Morris frowned. "Order in the court." Tom leaned forward. "Lily, when you said he remembers, who are you talking about?" Lily looked confused, then said softly, "The man who hurt Mommy." Daniel's heart stopped. Tom's voice trembled slightly. "The man who hurt your mother? Was he in this room?" Lily nodded slowly, her eyes drifting across the courtroom. Then, with trembling fingers, she pointed at Mark Dalton. Gasps filled the air. Dalton stiffened, his smirk vanishing. "That's ridiculous," he snapped, rising from his seat before the guards forced him back down. Judge Morris banged her gavel. "Order. Mr. Dalton, you will remain silent." Tom pressed gently. "Lily, how do you know he's the man?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Because Ranger knows him. When I saw Ranger, he looked at me the same way he looked at that man. Like he remembered. Like he was sad." The courtroom fell silent. Daniel's chest tightened as fragments of the case began to fit together, pieces he hadn't seen before. The abandoned warehouse. The faint scent Ranger had tracked not just to Dalton, but to a second unknown location. And Lily, the missing child from one of the early cases, thought to be too young to testify. Tom glanced at the judge. "Your Honor, permission to call Officer Reed to the stand for clarification." Judge Morris nodded. "Granted." Daniel stood, the weight of the moment pressing on him. He took his oath and sat beside Lily, who looked up at him with innocent trust. "Officer Reed," Tom began, "you've worked with Ranger for how long?" 5 years, Daniel replied. "And in that time, has Ranger ever shown recognition or emotion toward a suspect outside of his training context?" Daniel hesitated. "No, except..." Once, the room leaned in. Tom stepped closer. "Explain." Daniel's eyes darkened with memory. "During one of our first raids on Dalton's properties, Ranger hesitated. He didn't growl. He whimpered. Like he recognized a scent. Not of Dalton, but of someone else. We found evidence later that a child had been there, but we never identified her. The scent trail led to an abandoned cabin registered under a false name." Tom's voice dropped. "And that child was later identified as Lily Harper?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes, we just didn't know then that Dalton was keeping her mother hostage." A collective shiver passed through the courtroom. Dalton suddenly slammed his hands on the table. You don't know what you're talking about. Judge Morris's voice cut through his rage. Mr. Dalton, another outburst, and I will have you removed. Dalton's breathing quickened. You think you know the truth? You think that mutt can tell you what happened? Ranger growled, low and steady. Everyone turned toward him. His fur bristled slightly, his gaze locked on Dalton. Lily whispered, He remembers. Again. Tom stepped back, eyes narrowing. Your Honor, if I may, I'd like to introduce new evidence uncovered last night. He lifted a folder. We obtained Dalton's personal storage records. Inside, we found a flash drive labeled Insurance. It contains video recordings from his hidden cameras, including footage from the night of the Harper abduction. Judge Morris's face hardened. Play it. The lights dimmed slightly as the footage appeared on screen. Grainy video filled the wall. A small, cluttered cabin. A woman tied to a chair. A child crying. Dalton's voice came through, cold and clear. You shouldn't have testified. Reed thinks he can save everyone. Let's see how he feels when another family disappears. The courtroom froze. Tom turned to the jury. This is not vengeance. This is calculated cruelty. This man didn't seek justice. He created victims to feed his hatred. Dalton shouted, That's not real. That's not. Judge Morris slammed her gavel. Enough. Remove him from the courtroom. The guards pulled him away as he struggled, shouting incoherently. You think this changes anything? You'll all see. The heavy doors closed behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Judge Morris took a long breath. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have all the evidence you need. The verdict you reach today will speak not only for the victims, but for the integrity of justice itself. The jury filed out to deliberate. Minutes stretched into hours. Finally, the foreman stood. We find the defendant, Mark Dalton, guilty on all counts. Applause erupted. Lily clapped her tiny hands, tears of relief streaming down her face. Daniel exhaled, the weight of months lifting from his shoulders. Ranger barked once, a single triumphant sound that filled the room with life again. Judge Morris smiled softly for the first time. Officer Reed, Ranger, your service to this community is beyond measure. And Miss Harper, she turned toward Lily. Your courage reminds us all that truth, no matter how small the voice, will always be heard. Lily smiled shyly. Thank you, ma'am. Outside the courthouse, sunlight spilled across the marble steps. Reporters surrounded Daniel, but he ignored the questions, crouching beside Ranger. You did it, he murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. You remembered what no one else could. Ranger wagged his tail, pressing his head into Daniel's chest. Lily came running up, her stuffed rabbit in one hand. Can I pet him? Daniel smiled. He's all yours. She hugged Ranger tightly. He's my hero. Daniel looked at her, and in that moment, every sleepless night, every scar, every haunting memory finally felt worth it. Lily looked up at him, eyes bright. You know what I said that day in court? When I pointed at him? Daniel nodded. You said he remembers. She shook her head slightly. No, I said it because Ranger remembered me. He saved me before. When Mommy and I were trapped, he was the one who found us. I just didn't know his name then. Daniel froze, realization flooding his eyes. Ranger had indeed found a child years ago during the rescue, a girl too traumatized to speak. That girl had been Lily. He whispered, You remembered him too. Lily smiled. He never forgot me. Ranger gave a soft bark, as if to say you're safe now. Weeks later, as autumn settled over Maplewood, a ceremony was held in front of the police headquarters. Ranger received the Medal of Valor. Cameras flashed, and applause filled the square. But Daniel didn't look at the crowd. His eyes stayed on Ranger, the silent guardian who'd carried the truth when words failed. In the end, justice wasn't spoken. It was remembered by a loyal heart that never forgot. And as the wind rustled through the flags, Daniel whispered to his partner, "Some heroes don't need badges. They just need someone to believe them." Ranger wagged his tail, the eternal echo of a bond forged not in words, but in trust, memory, and unbreakable loyalty.